Starting Monday, voters in suburban Cook County can cast their ballots. Cook County Clerk's Office announcing expanded early voting and a need for election judges on Election Day. Suburban residents can vote at more than 50 polling places. Sites are open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday and from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Saturdays and Sundays through Election Day. Voter registration is available throughout early voting and on Election Day, Tuesday, March 19th. Early voting in all of Chicago's wards begins Monday.
So a lot to talk about this week surrounding the Illinois primary. Cook County judge ruled Donald Trump ineligible from state ballots for participating in an insurrection.
But voters will still be able to choose Trump in the March 19th primary. Joining us to explain is the host of the WGN Political Report, Paul Lisnek. Hello.
What a week.
What a week. All sorts of stuff. Let's start with Trump off the Illinois ballot. He has appealed a judge's ruling to remove his name from the Illinois primary ballot, and this is similar to the one in Colorado and Maine, right?
So it's exactly it. I mean, the judge here basically used the same reasoning, saying his conduct violated Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. But she also allowed for a couple of stays. One was till today to give Trump a chance to appeal, which he did. But even if that hadn't happened, there was another stay to say, and we'll see what the Supreme Court says. Put your money on the fact that the Supreme Court is going to reverse Colorado. The only thing that could happen would be they reverse it and make it apply like to something specific to Colorado, which allows Illinois to stand. It's just not going to happen. The Supreme Court is going to basically say that that without a conviction for insurrection, it just can't stand. His name will be on the ballot. Trump supporters will be able to vote for him, and that'll get turned around.
Well, speaking of the election and the campaigns, President Biden and Donald Trump both in Texas on the migrant crisis.
At the same time?
At the same time. Trump persuaded GOP Republicans to kill the president's bill. And meantime, you've got, this executive action that the president may or may not take. How likely do you think that's going to be at this point?
Well, so first of all, I think Biden is definitely going to try and take executive action, and whenever he does, will be brought into the courts, which is what he's always said. The Republicans keep telling me to take action, but you're going to bring me to court when I do, and that is what will happen. The interesting thing about both of them being there at the same time is that Biden was there with the border guard, the folks that he controls and whatever, and actually Trump went there to be with the Texas National Guard and Greg Abbott. So Biden was actually with the people that can do something about it in terms of federal control. It was an interesting tactic Biden uses, which was to basically say, Mr. Trump, join me in this. Let's work together. You take the credit for it. I don't care. Let's fix it. And Ray, you're right. It is true that Republicans, based on Trump's order, have essentially refused to take up the border bill that was suggested, that Republicans have said is the toughest bill they've seen in decades. The question is whether voters will understand that that is happening at the order of Trump, that they basically are looking at the election and not fixing the problem, or whether people just say the border's a problem and they pay no attention to why we continue to be there now. Admittedly, Democrats didn't do anything about it for 3 years, but they're trying to do something now.
Let's focus a little more on the Trump court issues. There are a lot of them right now. Let's talk about the one where the judge has blocked partial attempt to pay some of that New York verdict. What was that, $400 and something million?
Well, $350, and then of course you add on the interest, and the interest is $100 some thousand every single day, so it's growing. So he has until March 25th to come up with a bond or pay the money. Now, what he did do was, first of all, he says he's worth billions and billions, but he did go to the court, and his lawyers basically said he doesn't have the money. So that's either a lie, or if it's true.
Does he have the money? Do you know?
Well, I don't know. I don't have his bank account. Ray knows.
Tell me. Does he?
You thought he might sell stuff,
I think he's got it within his buildings and all of that. Certainly he's got that kind of money within the buildings. But does he have liquid, access to cash? Seemingly not, based on what he's saying. But here's a break he did get from the judge. The judge did lift that part of the order which says, and you may not get any loans from any bank that's licensed or does business in New York. That wipes out everybody, including Deutsche Bank, which is the one bank that always gave Trump money. Well, that's been lifted. He can get money from those banks. Now, whether those banks see him as a viable risk or not is up to them. But it opened up a door for him to have access to the money. He's got to do it by March 25th. Amazingly, Micah, the same day that the criminal trial starts in New York. The hush money case, as it's referred to, or as the Albert Bragg, the prosecutor, calls it, the election interference case.
Then you got the Mar-a-Lago issue with the
So
documents.
they met with Judge Cannon today. She didn't issue, we thought we would get a scheduling order out of her. Even Jack Smith has said, all right, let's take a date in July. I think he knows that's not going to happen, but he said it. Trump's lawyers, interesting little chess move there. They said, no, we want a date in August. Well, why would they do August when they really don't want it until after November? And the answer is because if Judge Cannon does go with the Trump date in August, and that date stays there for a while, it essentially pushes the Judge Chutkan, New York, D.C., January 6th case, it pushes it off the calendar. Now, of course, I'm going to talk about the Supreme Court, but that's off the calendar right now anyway until the Supreme Court rules about the immunity decision, which many people were surprised the court took. I wasn't as surprised as they took the issue as I am the way they delayed taking it. Saying no to Jack Smith a couple of months ago when he said, you need to deal with it. No, we're not going to. You go handle it to the appellate court. And then waiting 2 weeks to then issue a one-page statement that says, we're going to take this and the case remains stayed. To a lot of people, it looks like the court is essentially trying to help former President Trump. I don't really think that most judges or justices work that way. It's just not the way they think, but it sure looks that way.
It does seem like a chess match.
It does.
Let's talk about the Michigan primary on Tuesday. President Biden won, but lost 100,000 votes to the uncommitted category because of his support of Israel in the Hamas war. How much do you think this will be a continuing problem for the president, or will it not be?
Well, look, it's a problem, but people there had a point to make, and they made it. He still won, and he won handily, right? The issue is this. Right now, anybody that, and Nikki Haley's votes, remember, she lost to none of the above. So what's happening in terms of these primaries, it is a primary. So would those same people who voted for the sort of none of the above, essentially, or uncommitted option, would they do the same thing in November when it is Trump versus Biden? I don't have an answer to that, but I do believe that a lot of people who are trying to make a point to President Biden now, which is to say, you need to do something about this Middle East situation, which, by the way, he doesn't run Israel. So all he can do is put demands on Netanyahu, but he can't make the call. He's doing what he can, but at the same time, I think it did send a strong message to the White House. Clearly, they're talking about it. They're trying to do something. I don't think a lot of those voters would do the same thing to him come November.
Can't let you go before quickly talking about Mitch McConnell stepping aside. Why now? His aides say it has nothing to do with his health.
So they have said that. And listen, one of the points that McConnell made was that, hey, look, his sister-in-law had just passed away. I think that probably had something to do with it. I don't know that he ever had any intentions of staying beyond one more term. It is interesting, though, that he will stay till the end of the term, and Trump is already pushing Republicans, don't wait. Let's find somebody now and get him up there because, he really can't stand Mitch McConnell. The new leader of the Republicans is going to probably be somebody named John Thune, John Cornyn, or John Barrasso. They are all behind Trump now. Thune was the last to go. Everybody lines up. So the bottom line is whoever heads up the Senate for the Republicans is going to line up with Trump. We're going to see a very different Republican Party in the Senate in a new term, whether or not I think Trump wins.
Looks like you have a busy show on Sunday.
Yeah, well, of course, we're looking at the 7th Congressional District right now. Representative Danny Davis will be on with an interview, and Melissa Conyers-Irvin, challenging him, will be on. Keena Collins was on last week. No, separate. Well, on my show, we try and give everybody their own moment. Just
that's good.
You get your own moment. Also, from News Nation, Chris Steyerwalt will be on. He's got a new political show that he'll be doing for News Nation. And then next Friday on the midday, always like to tell you about the midday. Next Friday, 11:45, I'll be interviewing an author named Rick Hasson, who wrote a book called A Real Right to Vote. The bottom line is, he said, with all the problems that go on with voting, the only way to fix it, a constitutional amendment that guarantees the right to vote. And he tells us, here's how you do it.
Have a good weekend, sir.
You too.
Thank you.